Welcome to the Doctor and the Dogman, episode 5. For those of you who haven't watched one of these episodes before, it's where we bring the reality and the science of subjects in the dog world crashing together, and then we scrape away the tarnish of misinformation and the dust of incorrect information. Dr Jodi sent me an article, and the article was talking about being able to make our dogs live longer. So what we decided to do was obviously combine Dr Jodi's work, because she does it with human ageing, with dogs. What can we learn from either side? What can we learn from the human side that's going to help us make our dogs live longer? Jodi, you want to tell me a little bit more about what you do? Because I don't really know what you do. I know you work about keeping people living a life longer, but what was it all about?
Yeah, so I'm actually super excited about this episode this month. I think actually if there's any topics that are going to bring both of our worlds crashing together, this is actually the main one. So yeah, we've done good in terms of what it aligns more to what I do day to day, as opposed to me coming to the podcast with a lot of questions for you, almost in terms of being in the dog world.
Gosh, there's loads of stuff I know on it because we're talking about dog subjects, but this is very much a human side, and I've gone into the human side as well, and I'm like, oh my God, so I've got a pile of notes in front of me, because there's so many things that when you start looking, work for both sides.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'd probably just want to start by saying, obviously, I am what you call a healthy ageing researcher. So that is pretty high level of an overview in terms of not being kind of super granular detail. But essentially, my job is to kind of carry out and lead on research projects that essentially will enable older adults to live both longer and healthier lives. So we all will age. We know that there's no kind of cure for that.
Speak for yourself, human.
Yes. But if you are human, unfortunately, I'm not coming to the podcast with any kind of myths or to dispel that we're not all going to be subjected to aging. But I think it's quite an important topic to discuss. I think in the human world, certainly we think about aging quite negatively. We think it's something that we're just predisposed to, if you like. So something that's going to happen to us as we age. And quite a lot of the older adults that I speak to have a real kind of acceptance about some of the difficulties in which they face, and they just think that they're predisposed to that. So I think one of the first things that I would say is that I would always try to dispel the fact that we can't age well. Obviously, I'm a healthy ageing researcher, so if there's ways that we can age well, and in terms of healthy ageing, just to put it into some context, it's really to ensure that people are living what we call disability-free life years. So we know that older adults are living longer, but not necessarily healthier lives. So we want to ensure that we all maintain normal daily activity, mobility, cognitive function, social engagement, general well-being. So that is quite specific to humans, but for sure we would want dogs to also live the entirety of their lives well.
Disease-free for as long as possible.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That sounds quite as though there's lots of bits there to go back together. Just to go back to last month's podcast when we talked about Brucella canis.
Yes.
There's been a development on that. I don't really know about it. They have put a ban on dogs coming in from Romania without a test. So they're now starting to test dogs coming into the UK from Romania.
Wow, that's quite. Is that as a result of our podcast?
It's nothing to do with us.
Of course, it's not. No.
But it's interesting because it is actually a step forward. I mean, I saw a post on it and went, "Oh, great stuff! Looks like things are moving in the right direction," and I just got a torrent of abuse.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was things. It's quite interesting because they were saying, "Well, this is just due to DEFRA being hysterical about this." And what was really interesting, and there's a lot of things that people were saying that are either inaccurate or totally untrue.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to come whether we get the same thing in your industry, because people are creating ways to live healthier, live longer. Do you have people that ignore the facts and just run with their own narrative? I mean, is that drug company related, or is it, or doesn't it happen?
Yeah, I think we live in. I think there's definitely been a change over the last kind of 5 to 10 years. I think we now live in a space where health and well-being is quite well accepted. That spans such a kind of a large kind of scope. It could be, from anything from nutrition to kind of physical activity, drug enhancing, medication. So it can really span, a wide range of things. And I think everybody's probably got their own agenda on what they think healthy aging is, and what that means. And I think that's quite open to interpretation to different people. But no, I don't think we get the same kind of, such disparity in views, if you like, as you do in the dog world, since I've been kind of looking into these sorts of topics.
There was all sorts of things being thrown back. It was like, this has got nothing to do with the dogs in Romania. Or when you look at the government website, it says the reason they've banned it is, or put this ban on, 50% of all cases in the UK of Brucella canis have been from dogs from Romania. So they're just ignoring certain facts. Oh, it's always been in the UK. It's been in the UK since the 60s. No, it hasn't. Do you know what I mean? It only got discovered in America in 65. So it's just complete garbage that's coming, and they're just using these things. Oh, it's not zoonotic. There's no real problem. I heard last week there's a vet. And I don't know why. I don't know much about it, but there's a vet that's caught it.
Wow.
She was working with a dog that was infected and didn't know the dog was infected, and she's now caught brucellosis from it.
Wow. I think there's some things that I would think people would not actively try to disprove when it's so there. And also I think there's some topics that people really need to be, I suppose, more educated on. As I think I came to the podcast last time and said, as somebody who is a dog owner to a puppy, I'm now a lot more cautious about the thought of mixing with other dogs, because once, your dog, like you say, if a dog is living with Brucella canis, essentially it would only take to kind of go on a walk and your dog to be in that same area and pick up on those.
It's transmitted via bodily fluids.
Yeah.
And dogs are pack animals. They're together. Yeah. In fact, same thing we were saying about humans. We now live in such close contact with them. Yes. Getting a dog's bodily fluids on you inside you is not that difficult. Dog licks your face, licks your hand, give it some food. Oh, have a piece of my sandwich. It's just so easily done. Yeah. So I think it is. I think it's a very interesting place where that's going to that, because it does need some work.
For sure, but good to see that.
There's people with agendas, again, I think that's it, is we have dogs from Romania and we have dogs from this, and we don't want to see it be any problems, as we said last month. So yeah, that's an interesting thing that's developed.
Good to update.
Yeah. How's Marlo?
Good. Yeah, 6 months now.
Wow.
Yeah. He's he's not as small as he was, so yeah, I think.
How long I saw you, last time I saw you was 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago?
Yes, probably 3 weeks. 3 weeks
ago?
Yeah.
How's his counter surfing?
He's well, to be honest, he still likes to counter surf a little bit. So we're working quite hard on that, because I think it wasn't a problem when he was tiny. But now both paws can get onto the table. It's something that we don't want to see. So it's just the next thing in our list of things to work on. But he's very responsive to training, and I think I've said this time and time again on the podcast. I think when you've got personal experiences of medical problems, having a dog previously, and other things that are influential factors, he's a different breed to a dogs that we've had before. So it's been, there's obviously testing moments when you've got a 6-month-old puppy.
Oh, yes, he's still a puppy. That's the thing. And if you're on those things, I mean, we had him here and we stopped the counter surfing within 30 minutes. It was like, not having any of this. And we stopped it, and he never did it since. But he goes back to his old, because he comes here, he gets stopped virtually instantly. Yeah. This isn't something I do here. Yeah. So it's easier to stop it. Then he goes back to the environment that he knows, where he's done it for. And, from a puppy where he can just scrabble up as he gets bigger. And it becomes a harder problem and a more complex problem to actually make sure you maintain it not happening. So
It's more of
It's challenging.
a routine thing, I think, and just different time points. And he's really responsive. He's 6 months, and to give him some credit, and we are working incredibly hard with him. But he's it's almost like he does it, and then he's like no, and it's the you can start to see the kind of it's like he's stuck on pause.
No, that's brilliant, because what's happening is he's actually realising his decision is wrong.
Yeah.
So before you need to say anything, he's like, oh, I shouldn't do that. That's really good.
Yeah.
He's now been at a stage where he's, in effect, correcting himself.
Yeah.
So he's like, oh, I shouldn't do that. So that's brilliant. That's really good. So what he's picking up, he's learning what you're telling him.
And I think the thing is, we've always tried to ensure that there's no kind of benefits to behaviours that you don't want to see, which I think is sometimes incredibly difficult, because I think there's been times where, I work from home and he kind of wants attention, and without even realising it, and I suppose there's so many puppy owners out there that, your dog will want your attention and you end up giving in, like as an automatic process. But one thing with the counter surfing is, he doesn't eat any of our food. He's never been given anything, necessarily of ours in terms of meal preparation or anything like that. But there's still a element of, you will be cutting up some fresh treats for him, or obviously his raw food is being put out in that space. So at first it was a bit like, what does he stand to gain from obviously being at this higher level? But obviously he's got an awareness, hasn't he, that obviously smells and food and come from there. Yeah. So it's just, it makes sense. At first I was thinking, we don't kind of feed you from this.
It's inquisitive, it's curiosity.
Yeah.
And again, in the dog's world, it isn't, they're not being malicious while they're doing it. They're just trying to see how they can get things to work.
Yeah.
And, that's what their life is all about. And so most animals, it's predicting the future. What do I do to make something happen? What do I do to get this time? That goes, obviously your PhD's in psychology, so you will go all the way back to the Skinner boxes and all that, and it's purely about what do I need to do to make something happen. Yeah. So those types of operant and classical conditioning routines are always there in all animals. So it's you've just got to build on what you're doing. It sounds like you're doing all right with that.
And it's funny because I think things present at different stages, and I think anybody that's got a 6-month-old puppy right now will know that something that wasn't a problem 2 weeks ago will surface, and you'll think, nope, don't want to see so much of that, and things just happen, I suppose, with age stages. And it's funny, when he was really super tiny, I think I remember saying to you, obviously he has raw food and it's prepared on the side, and then obviously he gets given that raw food. And initially, when he was 3-4 months old, he was just like he was just boing, but very early on, and I just thought, you can't have this twice a day. There's this complete lack of control around food time. It drove me mad. So, but that was something really easily fixable. It was almost like he got that straight away, because it was like, if you're going to continue that behaviour, I will walk away and you'll never get the food. So
you're teaching him impulse control. Yeah. And that works across so many different things, so many different areas. If he learns that he doesn't get what he wants by jumping around like a fool, or jumping up at you, or bouncing off your sofas, or bouncing off your front door, or barking at the neighbour, then it's teaching him those rules very early on. That's great. It'll just work through so many different things.
Yeah, and he just gets that now. He has like a little vet bed in the kitchen, so we say on your mat, and he sits on the mat, and he it's almost like quite cute to see. I'll have to almost like upload a video. His legs are literally like this. He's like his 4 paws are just dying to leave the floor, but he's like, no, must stay down. And he's just,
if I do, I don't get what I want. Yeah.
So he's a smart boy on the whole. There's things that obviously, of course, are challenging. He's 6 months old, but on the main, he's an absolute joy. So, yeah.
It's going well with him then.
Yep.
So this article that you sent me. Yep. The first thing I saw on the front, which is what I was going through, was the whole article was about making dogs live longer. Yeah. And they were talking about some new medical things that we might get onto later on, who knows. But they were talking about rhyomycin, I think that's how to pronounce it. Yeah. I'm going to get my glasses on, come here. I say I've made notes about this stuff because it wasn't stuff I was really knowledgeable about. Rapamycin, sorry. And that was a new drug, and it's down at cellular level and things like that. But what I found quite interesting was there was a lot of things that linked into the human side that was very much now. Things you can do on a day-to-day basis. And I went, yeah, I know. I saw that in the human. I went, oh, well, we do a similar thing with dogs. But this first thing that drew me in was this, are dogs living longer today? And there was a study that was from Japan saying that they are. Now, I've seen both sides of this, because you have people who are talking about vaccinations and you shouldn't vaccinate your dog as much as you do, and if you vaccinate it less and pour less flea treatments on it, and all these less wormers in it, and there are people doing holistic stuff now. Your dog will live longer. They used to live longer ages ago, and then you've got somebody saying the other thing, they're living longer now. And I went into it, and I just thought I'd do a bit of digging about. Yeah. There's an awful lot of studies on this that they don't contradict one another. They come from so many different perspectives. Yeah. So you'll have in one statement that vaccination campaigns against things like parvo have increased dogs' overall age. But on the reverse of that, another study was looking at how vaccines impact the stage and the potential link between cancers and things like that. Yeah. Then you're talking about dogs living inside and how that is more conducive to longer living. But then they were getting things that because of the way they were living, they were getting chronic stress, and therefore that was causing inflammation and problems there, so they were having problems there. So it was a really quite a very mixed bag of studies saying whether dogs do or don't live longer. So that was sort of where I started from. And then I just wondered, do you have the same thing on the human side? Because there's so many different things. Because again, lots of these things that you're talking about here, obviously vaccinations, well, there's this big thing about the COVID vaccination, and there's this big thing about, actually getting out and doing exercise. It's better for you. Do you get the sorts of things where there are things that studies say one thing and say an opposite thing if you're looking at it from a different perspective?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I think we've maybe alluded to this in the podcast before about how sometimes it's quite difficult for members of the public, for example, to read scientific journals, and we call it kind of like a level of critical appraisal in the science world. We kind of try and take the data and think, how can we kind of unpick it? And I think I've maybe drawn a little bit more on something called limitations previously, and how you've got to be slightly cautious in terms of interpreting the data in which you read. And there is quite a lot of misinformation out there, and kind of conflicting opinions. But I think I've spoken a little bit more about the benefits, I think, of doing things like systematic reviews and things called meta-analyses. And what they do is basically they take almost every kind of eligible study in that area, even if the views are extremely conflicting, and they kind of plot them in terms of results for you to be able to see the numbers in terms of how many are for one thing and how many are against. And it allows you to make a little bit more of an impartial decision about the data that you're kind of receiving, if that makes sense. So we do have ways to try and unpick that. But yeah, there's definitely very conflicting kind of views about, is it kind of overall longevity that we're trying to kind of aim for, or is it better quality of life over a realistic lifespan, if you like?
Yeah, because some of these things they're talking about better medical care, better procedures, chronic illness support and management has increased and improved. So dogs are living longer, but they're living longer with these cancers or these autoimmune diseases because we're stuffing them full of drugs to keep them alive. So there's that side, which isn't really, I guess, increasing the healthy lifespan. It's just increasing the lifespan.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I really picked up on. So I'm in the kind of human aging world every day. So I kind of sit in this space that's quite comfortable of. We know that we have improved human longevity and lifespan with kind of medical advances and all those sorts of things, kind of national guidelines and all the kind of health advice that we've got. But I think, and I think we've maybe alluded to this in the podcast before, about how sometimes it's quite difficult for members of the public, for example, to read scientific journals, and we call it kind of like a level of critical appraisal in the science world. We kind of try and take the data and think, how can we kind of unpick it? And I think So essentially what we're striving for now as healthy aging research is that we know we can kind of get quite comfortably into our 70s, 80s, 90s, some people even kind of surpassing 100. But essentially it's kind of what I said earlier, is about having kind of disability-free life years. So, there's things like polypharmacy. Are you kind of taking 3 or more medications daily? There's obviously, both, acute and chronic long-term conditions that many people have, 1 to 2 kind of conditions. We call that multimorbidity. So are we kind of living longer but need additional kind of health and social care support, or are we able to maintain independence? I think with dogs where that differs is we're still in this space of how can we get them to live as long as possible. I think only when we're really pushing that limit of how long we can get them to live does it then kind of flip that switch, if that makes sense too. How can we improve those life years?
Yes, because obviously, I mean, you made the comment about social help and things like that. The NHS is being pushed to the max.
Yeah.
So that would mean that we're also living longer, but there's more people and there is more problems. So, and when you look at the dog side of it, you've got massive amounts of genetic disorders coming forward. Now, those disorders have probably, a lot of those have already been there. They're sort of DNA defects in effect, mutations. But because when you look at the breeding of the dogs, then we're talking a lot of dogs are being bred, we've talked about this before, inbreeding coefficients. They're being bred so close together for the show ring, and because of breeders who don't know what they're doing, you end up increasing that risk factor of those mutated genes meeting up and causing a problem. So you then have more autoimmune diseases, you then have more just general really bad health problems. Then you've got, all that side. So again, is that something that happens in the human side? Are we getting more, I mean, obviously I know there's COVID, but are we getting more variations of different cancers and different diseases that are coming out to make things worse and harder to live by?
Yeah, and I think this was something that really struck a chord with me when I started to obviously take what I know about human aging and try to see how it kind of compares in kind of dogs, because I think although we have genetic variation in humans as a species, it's just completely not comparable in my personal and professional opinion to that of dogs, given that there's such variety. I think what we do see with humans, and which is also kind of piqued my interest, which we can go on to talk about later, is this idea that obviously humans and dogs are now kind of living side by side in these environments that are ever changing, and almost like a topic for a kind of separate kind of episode of the podcast. And that, so obviously we're seeing that obviously there's different types of cancers, different cell mutations, and some of that is down to the environments in which we live in. If we live in particularly kind of built up areas that are kind of more kind of city rather than rural, is that actually causing more cancers in terms of emissions from cars, etc.
They're getting stuff because of the environment that we actually have them now living in, rather than living out in the wild in the middle of nowhere as they would do.
Yeah, so essentially what some of the kind of research that I was looking at as well was saying that some of the things that are so interesting and so comparable is that actually we're living side by side in these environments that we know kind of increase our chances of aging badly as humans because of things like pollution and kind of emissions and global warming and kind of other things. So it's quite interesting that we've got 2 very different kind of species in terms of humans, canine, dogs, but actually we're kind of going through these free living environments together, kind of side by side, but we represent obviously very different kind of genetic disposition. I think one thing that was really interesting to me was how diverse dogs are as a species, and I think that's seemed to be quite well understood in the science world in terms of people that kind of research animals, given that obviously there's this kind of disparity between lifespan and life years, if you like, of larger dog breeds compared to smaller. So you'll probably know more about that than me, that obviously some things that I think are easier for me from a point of view of healthy aging research is sometimes we know if we do things called randomized control trials, which, you know, you can see for kind of different drugs, or whether it's a physical intervention for somebody as they age to improve health, etc. We tend to kind of go through randomized control trials, and what we see is that tends to be quite representative. Then if that shows a significant improvement in health, we would expect to then be able to kind of roll that out nationally if that was kind of turned into some sort of kind of evidence-based model. Whereas I don't think we're in this space yet where we know enough to do kind of a trial on one breed of dog. Would we be necessarily confident that it would have the same effect in a different breed?
Well, it's interesting you say that. When you're looking at DNA testing, now, cleft lip puppy.
Yeah.
He obviously, I wanted to know whether it was a genetic. I've never had a puppy with a cleft lip before, or any form of cleft, and I wanted to know whether this was genetic. And I rang a number of the genetic companies, spoke to a few genetic scientists. And they said for Cocker Spaniel there is no defined test. It's not been verified. So they said there's one for I think it's the Nova Scotia duck trolling dog or something, but they said we can't guarantee it's the same gene. It may be, but we can't guarantee. So even in the same condition in different dogs that are similar, because that's a water dog, a spaniel's a water dog, you haven't really got the same genetics all the way through that are kicking the same problems off. So yeah, you'd have to almost do it per dog, and or per breed, should I say. And what's interesting is to say when you look at it, there are genes that go across the same cross-section. I mean, Cocker Spaniels and Welsh Springer Spaniels, they both have a condition called FN, and it's in the same gene in the same dog, in both breeds, sorry. So you can then sometimes say, yes, well, if they have that mutation with that gene in the Cocker Spaniel, and they have that gene with the same mutation in the Welsh Springer Spaniel, it produces the same result. Because they've verified it, so they've actually found a dog with the conditions, found the genetic, found the disorder, so it's been basically proven. But it takes so much to get there for that.
I just started to kind of unpick a little bit more, and we're quite in a fortunate position. I think in terms of healthy aging in humans, I think that we're nowhere near some of the answers that we want to be. You know, in hindsight, overall kind of longevity and to prevent overall mortality is where we're all at. But actually, I think most people that you speak to on a personal level would say, I would prefer to live to X number of years and maintain independence than live forever. You know, I think we know that there are, you know, cellular and molecular changes that we can't avoid as part of aging. There's things that we can do and trials that we can conduct where we can see how we age better. I think the thing that really stuck with me with dogs was it's going to take quadruple the amount of time, in my personal opinion, because of those.
The differences per breed. What's interesting is they're starting to use dogs as analogues, if that's the correct term, for humans, because their lifespans are shorter, and they can see the benefits or the not so benefits of those changes with those drugs or those way of living. And again, when you look at a dog, you change its food, for example, I can see changes in dogs instantly. And I've had so many people who have been feeding ultra-processed food, and I've explained to them. I had a lady who had a Shih Tzu, and her dog had been fed kibble pretty much all its life, ultra-processed food. And I explained it to her, and she said, I'm going to try that. She came to us for a new puppy, and she said, I'm going to put it on the puppy definitely, but I'm going to try my other dog. She came back to visit her puppy, and I said, oh, how's your other dog? Has it tried its raw food? She went, it's not the same dog. It's got so much more energy. It's got this. It had this allergy before, and it was scratching. It doesn't do any of that. It used to breathe funny. It doesn't do. And all these things have changed. And she said, I said, have you just changed its food? And she went, oh, yeah, that's all I've done. I've given it the food you told me to feed it. Completely different dog.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing I would say. And another thing that I think is really an important differentiation here between kind of human aging and dog aging. we actually are quite fortunate that obviously the government and national guidance is a varied diet, and obviously people choose different forms of that, whether that's, you know, eating meat or being vegetarian, or now we obviously have vegan and plant-based diets. But we've got information out there about the benefits of obviously intaking so much protein, so many carbohydrates, healthy fats, you know, avoiding saturated fats, etc. So we know quite a lot now in the space about nutrition and how that helps aging. But actually, for dogs, again, I think there's so much more progression that could be in that space. I think there's more of a chance, I think, obviously knowing now how I feed Marlowe, that if that food was good or bad, they're kind of subjected to the repetition of that, aren't they, over all of those life years. So if it's good, great, and you could see that there'll be kind of relative health benefits of that over a long-term period. But like you've just give that example there, it's not so great. You know, I think as humans, as we age, there's a level of kind of children being fed by parents. And I think that we'd said about that is a very similar dynamic to obviously you feeding a dog also and making those informed choices for kind of people who, or dogs, puppies that are less able to make their own decisions. But I think it's interesting that obviously as we become adults, we've always got this idea that we can educate ourselves and make decisions around food, whether that be good or bad, and that will have some sort of kind of impact either positively or negatively on how we age. So there's some quite big similarities in terms of the benefits of how we would age kind of dogs and humans. I think there's some quite distinctive kind of behavioural elements to it that probably inform it a little bit more than kind of the actual topic of nutrition, if you like, for example.
What are the things you're talking about there then?
So I think that obviously we have got quite a lot of national and government guidance now in terms of what we should eat, how much we should eat.
Someone would call that a nanny state. Don't tell me what to eat.
Absolutely. And some of it is very high level and overgeneralized. You know, we're so probably used to looking at kind of calorie intake, aren't we, on backs of packets, and this idea that, you know, men need X amount of calories per day and women need slightly less calories per day, and this is what a proportion of your food plate should look like, and so much should be protein and so much should be carbohydrates. And that's really not just one size fits all, and I think it's really important to say that. My
number one point is proper food, healthy food, quality food. And then when I started researching the human side, it said this is the number one thing for being healthy and living longer and living better. Proper food, healthy food, fresh food, not ultra processed.
Yeah, and what I would say is something that you can always kind of go off and watch, and this isn't dog related, is there was actually a programme released. It was a documentary, a couple of parts, I think on Netflix actually, and it was called Blue Zones in the World, and it was people that had healthy adults that lived almost to 100 years of age, and there's different zones across the world where longevity and aging is almost like in kind of its ideal. I think there was a place in Japan, there was a place in Italy. It's a really interesting, it's visited what they call kind of blue zones in the world, and it's where people age well. And parts of those documentaries are demonstrating how physical activity is a part of people's lives. They stay active into their old age. They eat whole foods rather than ultra-processed foods, healthy fats, kind of proteins, organic kind of food sources. So, they're not kind of living on fast food, if you like. So it was all kind of regions and areas across the world where maybe slightly more remote. Obviously, the terrain may be different, so it's not just kind of walking on flat surfaces or taking the car everywhere. So there's really kind of key factors about the benefits of a good nutritious diet, the benefits of maintaining physical activity over your whole lifespan. So these are all things that I could see being perfectly aligned to a healthy aging dog.
Because when you, the thing that kicked it in for me with the exercise was it was saying that it's inactivity in both humans and dogs is classed as a silent accelerator of age.
Yeah.
Now, I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, that if you can keep the aging process at bay, your cells are in a healthier condition and therefore you're less likely to pick up a condition or a disease or have, bad joints or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And now, so we're in this space, so we call it sedentary behaviour is now the term for periods and long bouts of inactivity. So we say, and I'm guilty of this as well, controversially as a healthy ageing researcher, that aspects of my job, in order to obviously write kind of research findings and write papers and things, there's periods of time where I am kind of sat behind a desk doing that work. So there's been some studies and some papers that essentially have compared long bouts of sitting to things like smoking 20 cigarettes a day, and basically there's a couple of papers that have come out now and said there is no real differentiation between these kind of negative health behaviours. They all impact how we age over time. And it's essentially saying that so, for example, things like on Apple Watches and other kind of fitness activity watches that you can get, there's actually inbuilt kind of algorithms now that every 30 minutes or every hour, it reminds you to stand. And the science where that's come from is when we're sat, like on this podcast now, we should maybe get up and stretch our legs. After kind of 30 to 40 minutes, once you're in a seated position, your body goes into quite a resting metabolic state. So you're really not expending any energy at all.
It doesn't work like that for me. I'm on my feet from 5 a.m. till when we finish this podcast. And when I sit down and stop, 5 minutes, I'm not resting on my sleep.
Yeah. This is it. And so what's happening in some of these research studies, and I actually did my master's thesis on this. As I said, I did my PhD in psychology, but I am an exercise physiologist by background. So one of the very early studies that I looked at was how to interrupt what we call sedentary bouts. So people in kind of office workers and people who sit down for quite long periods. And the supervisor that I had on that project, she's a fantastic professor based out of Manchester Metropolitan Uni. She's really she's an incredible scientist, and she essentially looked at the benefits of interrupting those sedentary bouts, and essentially what kind of her research has kind of pioneered and gone on to say is sometimes we don't always need what we term kind of vigorous activity. So we don't need to get people always to kind of go out and run a marathon and get to kind of that peak level of physical fitness. It's incredible if you do that, but actually sometimes people can leave their homes and go to the gym and engage in what we call kind of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So they may go and physically exert themselves exceptionally, hard for a 1 to 2 hour period in the gym, but then they might spend kind of their other 22 hours of that day in a very kind of resting metabolic state. And what her research looked at was if we interrupt those sedentary periods, so for example the algorithms on the watches that say stand up for a couple of minutes on the hour every hour, does that elicit kind of the same health benefits in terms of not being in a resting state that one kind of hour of vigorous physical activity would? And her research has kind of pioneered the fact that it's about just not letting our kind of metabolism go into that rested state. It's because we can push ourselves and we can physically exert ourselves, but then for 22 hours of the day we can kind of be in this sedentary behaviour.
So is that why people are a lot more likely to stand up at work, stand up behind the desk on the phone and move around a lot more? They've got desks that are higher.
Yeah, so we've started to see this whole shift now in request for standing desks in kind of corporate offices. We've definitely got some in our university, which is fantastic. So this idea that if we're stood, we're expending more energy than if we're sat in that rested state. So there's so many kind of physiological benefits that we get from that. So
looking at that, we take our dogs out for a walk in the morning, and we may only take them out for a long, they're 1 hour in the gym, if you like, in the morning. Some people may take them out twice. would we then be better to take our dogs out 4 or 5 times in that day for very short, even for less than run around the garden for 2-3 minutes, and then bringing them back in because we're breaking up that sedentary state?
I think so. I think there's got to be a crossover between the two metabolisms. I think what we see, and this is just not scientifically, this is just what I see with Marlowe as a 6-month-old puppy. I think dogs are more predisposed to be up and down, kind of. You can, and you may see this more or less, but I think kind of humans move around an environment like a home, and a dog kind of follows you in that way sometimes, or you'll hear them kind of get up to get a drink, or I feel like the bouts of rest, other than maybe through the evening, are significantly shorter in duration.
Well, when you take it back, if you look at the wolf and they're travelling 15, 18 miles a day, patrolling their territory, looking for prey, they're constantly on the move. So linking into that, their muscular and skeletal system is designed to be constantly moving. So therefore, if we take our dogs out and we give them the ability to have lots of movement, lots of ongoing things, that's when you get the release of things like myokines. Now, I notice that's on the human side as well, because I talk about myokines with dogs and having your dog moving. It changes their mood, is the best way to put it. I think it was called the happy drug or something, somebody called it. And it changes your mood, your metabolism.
Like endorphins,
Releases so many different things into your system. But what you're doing then, because the dog is, if you like, designed to run, to move, because you're fulfilling that DNA criteria, if that's the right way to call it, your dog's a happier dog. But what you're not doing is you're not having the dog becoming stressed. If the dog's not able to exercise, it's stressed. There's loads of people who come to me for training and their dog might be anxious or have anxiety, or my dog just can't settle, and it's just constantly looking for. And I'm always saying to them, how much off lead time do they get? How much time do they get to just run? And in a lot of cases, they're saying not a lot. We take them for walks, but we don't allow them to trot and to run and to just lollop along at their own speeds, because we don't like them off lead because we're not sure of the recall. And one of the first things I say to them, if you can get your dog running and just, I mean, these people who run with their dogs, I'm pretty sure if you did a survey, you wouldn't find very many of those dogs that were anxious or stressed. They wouldn't have anxiety, because that movement, releasing those myokines, basically reduces the amount of anxiety and stress dogs have. And is that something the same with humans? The more you move, the better your mood is?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one thing that we always say about the very holistic benefits of, bodily movement. And I think sometimes we're now part of a generation, sadly, where because of the increase in electronic devices and the reduction in physical activity, paired with the fact that our lifestyles are exceptionally busy, we're communicating with people virtually, we're seeing more a higher prevalence of depression and anxiety. And in all of the physical activity studies that we look at, irrespective of aging, this can be in any kind of age cohort. So this can be in, adolescence, it can be in people kind of up to 30, then between 30 and 50. There are so many benefits to being physically active, and I think that's always something that maybe is encouraged by the National Health Service if you're feeling kind of periods of anxiety and depression, to kind of try and get out even on a walk if it's not something that obviously physically exerts you too much. There's so many health benefits around that to kind of boost your mood, and we know those kind of scientific facts. What I would say differs between humans and dogs, and this is just kind of my thoughts around this, is this idea of the difficulties we have around behaviour change and other things that influence things like depression, anxiety. So I understand it, it would be not correct of me to say if you're experiencing anxiety and depression, you go out on a walk and it will fix those problems. I think there's so many more contributing factors, and actually people who would benefit from physical activity might see anxiety around, what do I wear when I engage in physical activity? So there's so many more contributing factors about seeing the benefits of physical activity in humans. I think actually sometimes for dogs they're just not getting enough, and hopefully there would be quite a quick and easy fix to obviously support them to engage more in activities that they were bred for previously.
I suppose because the dog doesn't have all those stresses about, you say, the anxiety from the human. What do I wear? What if I meet somebody I don't know? Or whatever it might be. There's probably 101 different things that could impact on them. The dog doesn't get the opportunity to do that because you're just overriding it as the owner. You're showing them what's best for them. So again, it's almost like having somebody with that anxiety. Right, your best friends coming round and we're going out together, and you almost force the person, come on, let's go, it's going to be fun. And you're doing the same thing for your dog. Come on, buddy, let's go, we're going to go, it'll be good. And the dog goes out, runs around like a lunatic for 20 minutes and comes back and feels, whoa, that was brilliant. So those are, I can see how those things are.
But there's like a flip side of it. I think when I was doing this, what I kept coming back to was, there's probably so many things that are good for dogs aging well, aging successfully, but actually it actually was slightly terrifying to me to think I've got the autonomy as somebody who's an adult who, yes, okay, I research healthy aging, but even if I didn't and I thought there's something wrong with me that I want to improve, or there's something that I quite like and I want to do more of that, I've got the autonomy to do that. I started to look at our dogs' aging processes, and not things specifically that are genetic, but lifestyle and modifiable risk factors, if you like, and they are entirely dependent upon the human in which the dog lives with.
Yes.
Which I actually find one of the quite interesting things about the idea of this episode of the podcast, because what I was thinking about in relation to that was, I'm a healthy aging researcher, so what we try to do is we try to conduct research studies that essentially are proven to be scientifically appropriate to help people to age well, all with a view that we positively impact the lives that we then ask people to engage in kind of these research projects. But for example, one specific one that I've kind of worked on over the last couple of years is this idea that we can take individuals who are at high risk of falling over as older adults and provide strength and balance exercise intervention to prevent falls. So we've got a number of evidence-based physical activity programs in this country that, given a long enough duration of engagement, you start to see a reduction in both how much people fall and the rate in which they fall over at, and whether they sustain subsequent injury from that fall, for example. So there's things that we can do with just physical activity, kind of strength and balance exercise alone, that can really change both the psychology of how confident somebody feels kind of independence-wise, but also making them physically stronger, improving,
But a lot of it's mental.
And a lot of it is, do you know what, actually, I've developed so much physically over the last 6 months that now I'm not fearful in kind of going out to the shops, or I'm not fearful in going out when it's slightly icy outside, etc. So there's always the thing I love the most about my job is this idea that, okay, I'm an exercise physiologist by background, so I understand kind of physical activity wise what the benefits for aging are, but mentally,
But your PhD must have helped.
PhD was psychology.
You've got the mental side as well.
So it's behaviour change. So we know it's good for us, but do we always engage in it? So that's a little bit different in dogs.
Yeah, I understand. But my point on that one is training.
Yes.
And it's the same thing. The dog is reliant on the owner to train, to put boundaries and routines in place for the dog. Without those boundaries and routines and clear structure, you will find your dog is stressed. And that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from. The dog does not know what it should be doing. The owner is not clear about what needs to happen, what they can and can't do. There's a culture nowadays where we shouldn't tell our dog no. Well, if your dog doesn't learn why it shouldn't do something, why should it ever not do it? You know, there are consequences for staying out at 3 o'clock in the morning when your parents have told you to come in at 11 o'clock. The same thing needs to happen for dogs. And I think, though, that mentality we're going towards now is one of, unfortunately, letting dogs cope because we're not allowing them to understand and function effectively in this mad world that they live in. You know, our world must be so strange to them. We can't even comprehend how they navigate their way through it.
Yeah.
But we're giving them, in a lot of cases, very little help to understand what's good, what's bad, what's safe, what's not safe. So therefore, that's the same thing, I'm guessing. If you're not able to do it for yourself, why would you be able to do it for your dog?
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that, with the amount of information out there, that I find a little bit overwhelming, both for people and then extending that out to the dogs that we have living with us in our homes, because sometimes we're not so good at humans, kind of preventing what's to come. So one of the real big difficulties we have when we work with older adults in terms of healthy ageing is this idea that we're going to be proactive about our ageing. So, there's definitely pockets of kind of people across the world, and it's public health messages dependent upon the country that you live in that kind of dictates this a little bit. But what I mean by kind of guidelines is there's information out there that's supposed to be able to equip people with the knowledge to make informed decisions about how to age well, and that obviously the science comes from maybe kind of what we do day to day. And there's so much information out there that even quite a lot of older adults, there was a recent survey done about whether older adults knew the amount of physical activity minutes that they should be engaging in each week, for example, in relation to kind of government guidance. Quite a lot of older adults didn't know what the guidelines were for how much activity they should be doing, what were the types of activities. Should it be strength? Should it be walking? Should it be, there's so many different activities out there.
But something is better than nothing. And are you finding a lot of adults not doing anything?
No, so we actually, funnily enough, find the opposite. And while something is better than nothing, I actually sit on the other side of the fence. So we get quite a lot of people saying, I'm a bit worried about falling over, but I walk all the time. I go to a dance class. I do some other physical activities. Quite a lot of those ones I've just named, there is no evidence to suggest that they would prevent falls in any capacity. So even if somebody walked every day for their entire life.
I see. So they're doing exercise, so it's making them healthier, but it's not managing the mental bit.
So it's improving other things. It's obviously maintaining a level of cardiovascular fitness. So I'm not saying that there isn't other benefits for other conditions, but there are some things that we need specific targeted intervention for.
It's not addressing their concerns.
Yes. Yeah. So it's interesting when we work in this space of healthy aging, sometimes we'll say, it's amazing that you do all these things, and I know this is going to be difficult for you to hear, but you need to do this as well, or you need to be proactive about this. So I think we need to, I don't know if we look at it in the same way with our dogs, that we're doing things today to improve things for them in 5 years' time. And that's the thing that's interesting, isn't it? That their lifespans, for us, we think that we've got time, but their lifespans are almost like so compact, aren't they, compared to us in terms of that accelerated ageing process.
I always talk to people about having your dog, if it's trained, if it's clear what it can and can't do, the stress levels are down, the anxiety is down, inflammation is down. The resilience is up. The dog's a lot more capable of coping, and you can see that in so many different things with so many different dogs. I suppose again it's the same thing. It's about doing the right thing with the dog. They might be doing lots of walks, but if the dog's a bit fearful or a bit nervous, they're not addressing those issues that happen when the dog gets like that. So it's a similar thing, really.
Yeah, and I think we maybe don't pay enough attention to this idea about this. Our responses to stress. You'll hear people say throughout your life, and I'm sure you've heard it, and loads of people say it, stress is a killer, stress is a killer, stress is a killer. And people just say that as, we hear it quite a lot in the ageing world about, I've had a stressful life, or stress is a killer. And we just kind of say it in almost like quite a comical way. But But there is some science behind that in terms of cellular and molecular changes to stress response. And
well, that's the same thing with dogs. It's always there in dogs. I've seen so much research on it with dogs.
And it's actually because of the level of inflammation that comes from the stress response. So I think that's really important. So now in the ageing world, what we're looking to do is find ways to combat the reduction in inflammation. It's linked to so many.
But it's not about the stress going up and coming down. It's how long it stays up for. It's the long term. So you go to do an exam, it's super stressful. You come out of that and go, that's not the bad stuff.
No.
The bad stuff is when you are worrying about the state of your finances for the next 6 years, or you're running a business and you're out of your depth or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, the long-term stress is where the real problems are, because that's what changes with.
So it's just like a consistent, like an elevated level of stress maintained over a long period of time.
And that's how a lot of dogs live.
Yeah, in like a constant state of stress.
Stage of stress, because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. Big ones are owners who are constantly touching the dogs. The dogs are searching for what they need to do. It's called non-contingent rewarding. If you reward a dog with a marker word, sit, mark it, reward it. The dog knows what it's done to get that reward, and therefore it knows what it needs to do to get the rewards, knows what it can't do because it's got the negative markers. But when the dog doesn't understand what it's getting rewarded for, it can't figure out what's going on, because these touching, these strokes, these words are all so random and come to us, they're not.
They make logical sense, don't they?
To us, but to the dog they don't. So the dog's like, what do I need to do next? And you can, I've had it here, I've had people sitting here telling me their dog has got super stress problems, and you can see the dog's pacing, and I just say to them, stop touching your dog, stop talking to your dog. And the amount of times they go, was I doing it? Yeah. Just leave your dog alone. And they leave the dog alone, and within 4 or 5 minutes, the dog's settled down, because it knows there's nothing moving with the human. I've got to touch. How do I get another touch? What do I do? They just settle.
And I think if we looked at that, if we reframed that and thought we're actually increasing stress, which then affects the dog over a long period of time in terms of how many years it lives, we'd start to kind of reframe the way we look at things, wouldn't we? In terms of if we thought that would have kind of biological change over time, we would think about that. And I think some of the things that, you know, we think about with aging is this idea around molecular and cellular damage, but actually it's some quite simple things that do kind of transmit to dogs. So it's this idea about changes to physical health. So when adults age, we see obviously a loss of muscle mass, strength. Bone density is a huge one.
That comes back to, I've got a point here, but I've just missed it out because it's the spaying of dogs. And
that was my next point.
Was it?
Yeah.
The big issue with dogs, certainly a big issue with humans, is it?
Yeah, so I became more aware of this. So kind of during my PhD, I was looking about, is there any kind of body compositional change which people are more predisposed to as they age? And then as a direct result of that, do we see a change in our ability to mobilise in free living environments? So essentially, do people fall over more, and what are the consequences of those falls, and what are the real things about our physical activity that reduce our independence as we age, is what I've been quite interested in for a long time. But something really interesting that we were able to do is we had the capability to put the older adults in which we were working with on something called a DEXA scanner. So you find these in the NHS as well, in terms of clinical environments. But essentially what that is, it's basically stands for a dual energy exorbiometry, basically. So what it's doing is it's looking at the composition of different kind of bodily structure. So we're looking at bone, we're looking at lean muscle, we're looking at what we call adipose tissue, so fat mass. So how much of those kind of different components has somebody got in their body, and we're able to obviously look then whether that predisposes them to any health conditions. But something that it's used for in terms of the NHS is this idea around osteoporosis. So something that I have become increasingly more aware of is this idea around menopause in women. full hysterectomies happening, for example, and it really translates perfectly to dogs. And I think we've talked about it in terms of me now having a male dog in terms of castration, but also I don't think people really realise how much it's almost identical in women, obviously, who identify as female, but also female dogs, because you remove the kind of reproductive organs before a woman has reached kind of that menopausal state, for example, and it can have real detriment to bone density being one.
Well, this is the big thing. I mean, you mentioned before about obviously bone density and things like that, but you go back to your myokines, and having those running through your system helps bones not go to that state. It helps regenerate them. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the correct terms are, but it was something that it keeps it keeps your bones strong.
Yeah.
So again, they're all linked, aren't they? Really? But yeah, when you're talking about the similarities, I mean, we are now seeing female dogs that have been spayed, and they are getting muscle mass and bone density issues. And that, I mean, spaying and neutering is a whole topic in itself, because the old science is different to what the new science is. But ultimately, we're seeing the same problems. You know, dogs as they're getting old, and they're now doing TRT, testosterone replacement therapy in dogs. Yeah. It's very new, but I'm guessing that's the same thing that happens with women.
Yeah, HRT.
HRT, yes, okay. So, yeah, just so many different things there that are just crashing together.
Yeah, and I think there are things that we can take and say, okay, we've kind of understood this to a really granular level in humans, and we can make kind of informed, educated decisions about how that would then, you know, perfectly transmit to dogs. And it's the same, you know, we know that in women, essentially there's kind of been some research around if women have issues around gynecology and need, for example, a full hysterectomy. And I think previously what used to happen is that there was some kind of discussion around whether the ovaries could be left in or not. And I know that there is views around this in terms of how controversial it is, and sometimes then it's can lead to ovarian cancer in some cases. And I know that there's been a lot of work in this space, but it was around the idea that obviously if the ovaries remain in, the hormones are still able to be in circulation.
Same thing with dogs.
But actually, in terms of hysterectomies in quite younger life years, we're seeing them performed in younger women now. And actually, there's this idea that if you have kind of a hysterectomy too early, it does actually have a direct link to kind of a reduced lifespan.
We have a lot of people come to us for puppies, and we still get it, but it's not so much now. Because we're talking to people about it before we get the question. Yeah. And what age do I spay and neuter? My answer is always, why do you want to do that? Well, it's the done thing, isn't it? It's like, no. There should be a reason why you perform that procedure on your dog, not just because it's the done thing. And the way we live with our dogs now has changed, so all those things are very different. Yes. As to why we did it. But it is that the mentality is we do it quite young. And there are vets who will do it before 6 months old. Yeah. And they're not even properly fully skeletal developed. The skeletons haven't properly developed. So what you've got is problems with, so many problems. I mean, it's not just the reproductive organs, it's all those chemicals you need for development. You can end up with organ failure. Yeah. So I'm guessing the same things are true with humans, because the other parts of your body are overcompensating to deliver those chemicals that they need, and you get kidney failure in dogs.
And what I think I found really interesting in some stuff, I think I was reading it earlier today actually, about the idea that obviously dogs are going through a more accelerated aging process. And I think I'd read an article that had compared, it was either the first 6 months or a year of a dog's life or a puppy's life to the first, I think it was 10.5 years of a child's life. So essentially what the comparison was is, if you spay and neuter your dog at 1, it's essentially had the equivalent of the hormone, the presence of the hormones for what would be the first 10 years of a child's life. And what we kind of know in terms of aging and what we know in terms of kind of exercise physiology is that humans don't tend to reach what we call full skeletal mass until around 25. That's males and females. So what we're saying is, which needs to be a kind of change in the narrative, is in one sense we're saying, okay, so 1 year, because it's accelerated, is between that kind of 7 to 10 year mark of what you would see in a human lifespan. But we would never ever recommend or advocate for hormone, kind of removing, reproductive organs at 10 years old, because what we know is that we don't reach full skeletal mass till 12 to 25. And now what we also know is that if women are requiring full hysterectomy between 30 and 40, or even between 40 and 50, because most women haven't entered natural menopause until post 50 or 55, we're seeing detriments there. So what we're saying is that's even allowing those hormones to be present for 20, 30, 40 years. But what we're doing to dogs is saying 6 months and then taking it away. And it's completely transferable in terms of higher risk of orthopedic disorders, higher risk of osteoporosis, stress, fractures, or on top of all of the other negative health outcomes.
It's just an absolute minefield of problems doing it.
Yeah.
And it just... everything, but then that's a complete other podcast, that is, because it's such a big subject. Something you mentioned earlier, which I got on here now, is you were on about social connections, and to me that's a big thing. Dogs are social animals. Yeah. They live in packs when they're in the wild. We are part of their pack when they're living with us in the house. I certainly see it. People will say if they live with more than one dog, oh yeah, he's the boss dog, and he doesn't take any messing, or she's the one that's... So there is that social hierarchy within dogs' structure. So they need that, and that enrichment of those games and playing and doing stuff. Is that the same thing with humans? Is that social interaction? And I don't think, obviously, there don't need to be social hierarchies, but that enrichment with other people, does that enhance the lifespan as it does with dogs? Because I know there's been studies done with dogs. Dogs alone are sad and unhappy, and they've shown it in so many different things. So, and I'm guessing their lifespans are shorter because that loneliness shortens your life.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that always makes me, I think, actually incredibly sad that we live, I think, in a world where there's so much opportunity for social interaction, but I think we've never seen more social isolation. So what sometimes we have a habit of doing with the older adults that we work with is we put on different provisions for people to go to. Right. But what I always say is, if you have an older adult that identifies, or you identify them as having, as being lonely, or you can identify that they are suffering from loneliness, maybe they've never had a spouse, or maybe they've had a spouse and now they're widowed and that person's died, so they're now living in the home alone. What we tend to do is we tend to say, we've put on all of this provision and you can go to it, and we can fund transport to it, and we can get you there. And there's all ways of addressing the barriers that help support people to engage in that. But I am somebody who sees it quite differently, and I say we're just reducing social isolation. We're not actually addressing loneliness, because to address loneliness, they need to be meaningful connections with people.
So you're talking then about enrichment.
Yeah.
And the lack of enrichment is cognitive decline.
Yeah. So what we see in older adults is we have this level of enhanced cognitive decline. We might be kind of talking to people in shops. We might be going to exercise classes where we say hello to somebody that we've met week on week. We don't really know anything about them. So we're less socially isolated, but there's no meaningful kind of connection happening between two people. There's no depth to the conversation. So that doesn't enrich an older adult's life. Right. But all of those things are linked to negative health outcomes, which I presume would also be transferable to a dog that demonstrates no enrichment, loneliness.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting, it comes out as unwanted behaviours. I don't like using the word bad behaviour because the dog doesn't know it's a bad behaviour. It's just a behaviour the dog does. It's unwanted to humans. So you get all these, you get howling, you get digging, you get chewing. And again, I think there's a misunderstanding there, like you were saying about the human side. Taking them out to do this isn't actually enriching them. People will buy these dogs, these stupid plastic games where the dog presses a button and moves a button or does something to find a treat. That's not enrichment. Enrichment is engaging, same thing, engaging with people, engaging with members of their pack. So, having those games where you're playing tug together, where you are hiding things and playing scent games together, those things are enriching, not just saying, well, there's some toys, chew on them till you're bored. That's not enrichment. And I think there's a misunderstanding between what a dog needs and what a dog gets.
Yeah, and I think this is where I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a psychologist. I always kind of refer to myself as very much a kind of like an interdisciplinary scientist. That's how I really like to put it. I like to take a lot of disciplines and say I can kind of understand that aspect and that aspect and that aspect. And I think it's because when you work in kind of a public health space or you work in an ageing space, and you might find the same with kind of dog behaviour, it's not just one kind of track that is the route to all kind of answers. We have a term where we say, there's quite a lot of kind of public health things that we're concerned about that are so we call multifactorial. So there's a lot of factors that would contribute to improving or being, negative towards that said thing. So, and I see dogs being the same, but I think it's interesting. We live in a space where, and I bet everybody will probably resonate with this, is as we age, everything gets a little bit slower, and we move from a house where we navigate stairs every day to a bungalow, so we don't navigate those stairs. But what we don't realise by kind of not navigating those things is we don't navigate them as much, so we're not used to them. So then when we come up against them, which is exactly the same for dogs, we're a little bit more anxious about things that we don't traditionally see a lot. But also, it's not built into our everyday routine. So we once kind of navigated stairs up and down all day, and that kind of helped us maintain muscle mass, it helped bone density, etc. But now everything's a little bit more easier to navigate, and we slow everything down, and we don't go out as much because we're getting older, and it reduces kind of social contact with people. So everything kind of seems to draw almost to a close as we age. And what we actually,
keep it pushed in for longer.
And what I always say is sometimes retirement for people can be the biggest accelerator of age, because we go from having habits, routines, being physically active, having social connection with people, using cognitive, being cognitively able, and then we go to kind of none of those things.
Well, I remember saying to you before we even did this, I think we were talking puppies at one stage. I don't think we'd met at that time. And I said to you, can I ask you a question? I hear this, that retirement is the biggest killer of old age people. Is that true, or is it rubbish? And you went, no, it's true. So that's where we're at with it. I think it's the same thing across the board. I mean, I think, you're looking at things that do have, say, multifactorial with dogs. Just looking here, one thing I sort of... one thing I like about raw food is that it keeps the teeth a lot cleaner, and the gums are a lot healthier. I also give my dogs, don't get treats. If they're training, they get a training treat, but we move off food very quickly, as I've said. But they don't get treats, so I don't go and buy packs of treats for my dogs to give them a treat here and a treat there, and these ultra-processed pieces of garbage. Yeah. They don't get it. They might get some vegetables at some point, a bit of this. They might get a pig's ear. They might get a rabbit's ear, something natural. But I give them a lot of bone. Well, I say a lot of bone. It's probably once every week to 10 days, so they get a bone to chew. And those things help to keep the gums and the teeth clean of plaque, as well as the food, because there's not all the junk in these fresh food meals that they get. They're getting, proper food. So therefore, we don't end up with a bacterial load in the mouth, which again can then cause problems further down the line. It goes to kidney problems. You can get inflammation. So poor, and same with humans, I suppose, poor mouth hygiene equals problems elsewhere, all linked together.
Yeah, and there's been, this isn't kind of dental kind of hygiene and whether people kind of have their own teeth in a older age isn't something I've necessarily ever kind of looked at or focused on specifically. But yeah, there's loads of studies out there that say there's almost the way we kind of approach it with aging is we kind of have almost like a bit of a predefined checklist now about the presence of things and or almost like known causes or causal links to, you know, poor aging and they're always there's so many factors that you can kind of figure in, and something that we tend to see kind of in association to that is socioeconomic status kind of has quite a big influential factor on how we age. There's health disparities which we see across the board, depending on, is a bit of a postcode lottery where you live, what your lifestyle has been, kind of what educational attainment you've got, and how that's kind of predefined the quality of your life and healthcare and the food that you eat, the healthcare that you've experienced, activities that you've engaged in. You know, they're all contributing environmental factors that people are probably quite blissfully unaware have a positive or a negative impact on aging. And I think we often see kind of, you know, dental health fall into that somewhat. So there's other kind of things that you'll think, does that kind of have an impact? And it will from a kind of a practical point of view. But also it's the other things that you think of. And I think that's something that I think maybe we'd discussed previously about the idea that it's difficult to really determine the lifespan of a dog or the capabilities of what age we can get a dog to when it is so varied in terms of based on the owner, isn't it, in terms of what kind of healthcare they get, what food they eat, what exercise they have. So I think it makes it even more complex that we don't almost have this like national kind of guidance that we align to like we do with humans about how much exercise we should do, what we should eat. And I know that we have such varied lifestyles as humans, so it doesn't account for all of that. But I think you would hope that kind of in medical advances and things, because we've got the National Health Service, no matter how stretched it is, there's kind of like an equity of access you would expect, and there's kind of some advancements that you would expect. If I presented with X issue and you presented with X issue at the hospital, the treatment would be largely the same because of government guidance and because of medical guidelines.
Speak for yourself, human.
I don't think dogs are so fortunate in that space. Some are really lucky and some are really unlucky.
Yeah, some the owners don't have any healthcare for their dog, and then they haven't got the healthcare because they can't afford it. So yeah, there are all those impacts as well. And I think because everything links together, there's so many bits that, you know, you're not feeding them proper foods because you might not be able to afford it, or you might not know any better. But ultimately, that then impacts on your gum health. I mean, overweight dogs.
Yeah.
You know, that must be one of the biggest killers, biggest shorteners of life, fat people and fat dogs.
Well, it's funny, we've like come full circle. So I obviously sent you the BBC Science Focus article that was like, let's get dogs to live as long as possible. Can this transfer into humans? I'm like, here's the overlap between our two worlds. Like, this is the point of this podcast today. But it's interesting. So also, and I think I'd said to you about how near or far were some of the prospects of this article, and some are further down the line and some things we already know. But something that's really gained in popularity over recent years is this idea about intermittent fasting in humans and the benefits.
Because some people feed their dogs once a day. We feed ours twice. Yeah. They're going on 2 big walks and they do stuff during the day. I just think that calorific load first thing in the morning is just too much, or last thing at night, just too much, so I prefer to break it up. But there is certain people who feel that feeding once a day, some people will actually feed 6, not 7 days. So whether they feed once or twice a day, they feed one day not at all. So it's almost like I miss a day. It's like a wild thing. They don't kill every day in the wild.
Yeah.
So again, that links back in because fasting is quite a new thing, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so it's quite a new thing. But the reason why we're aware of it in kind of our ageing research is it first kind of came around because it's got real benefits for brain health. So there was quite a lot of research done quite some years back about the idea that fasting for kind of intermittent fasting, so this idea that maybe you kind of either eat for 6 days and miss the seventh, like you've just said, or periods of kind of fasting throughout the day. So there's some people that will still eat the same calorific so they're still very much the same as the idea around dogs. So you'll still take on the same amount of calories, but you will eat between, say, a 6-hour window out of 24. So some people choose to eat 2,000 calories between 12, so kind of 12 lunchtime and 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And the rest of the time they don't eat. So this kind of has been quite new, and the reason why we really focus on it in kind of aging is it actually has got some really promising results for the prevention of Alzheimer's, so brain health. It's interesting now that we're starting to look at it in dogs. So the article, obviously the BBC Science Focus article, basically was also looking at it in terms of what are the health benefits. So the article discussed a little bit more that they did. So essentially it's now coming from 2 professors in America that have obviously started the dog aging project, haven't they? So this is where it's important to obviously say that the article was focusing on what they're looking at. And I do really think that this is going to produce over some years some promising results. So they obviously started it in 2014 and now with this idea that obviously it's helping dogs and their owners to live longer, healthier lives. So it's that kind of alignment. But what they have had the benefit of is around 50,000 dog owners have kind of enrolled them to the study. But what it's enabled them to do, and I think we talked about this on some different issues, is obviously respond to some surveys in terms of doing quite a large analysis of some data. So essentially what they'd said in relation to this was that dogs that were fed once a day were at lower risk of developing several age-related conditions. But what they then went on to say when I kind of dug into this some more is that they didn't really know the cause and effect of that. So what they were saying is they didn't know whether it was that dogs in poorer health were just fed more often, so were they more overweight?
Taking tablets or something like that as well, yeah.
We can't just feed our dogs once a day because they're on medications in which we need to put it in a bit of ham or something. Or is it just that, it's that, okay, I feed my dog once a day and they're really healthy, but actually I've not got the option of that, and then they're on medications, which of course they're more unhealthy than the dogs that obviously aren't on medications. So what they're kind of going down the track of is, I can see it has benefits for weight management in dogs, but the problem there lies is that obviously there's things we can do earlier up the kind of line where our dogs aren't overweight, which goes back to obviously last kind of not our last episode, the episode before that. So whereas for humans, fasting, so it improves insulin sensitivity, so stabilizes our blood sugar, so prevents diabetes.
So I've seen this in dogs, insulin stabilization. Some of the, and I've never really looked into it. So that's got to do with diabetes, has it?
Yeah, so it prevents type 2 diabetes, because essentially what happens is when we fast, it allows. So what we say now about the society in which we live in, we say we're constantly snacking all day. So this is where there is real disparities in some of the data, because people will say eat little and often. People will say have all of your calories in a really short window. So there are some, probably like there is in the dog world, there's some really conflicting evidence.
And I'm guessing you've got the same issues, because if you're taking user surveys, and the same thing with these people, you've got people eating in a certain way or fasting in a certain way, and it's all subjective to how they think they're doing.
Yes.
You know, like we said about the people, about the fat dogs, no, my dog's not overweight. And the vets were, yeah, that one's overweight.
Yeah.
Same thing, what you think is one thing, what is actually right is another.
So, but in terms of the insulin, what they're able to check is how does that stabilise over a period when we fast and when we eat. So what they're saying is about people that snack a lot, our response to that, it kind of peaks and troughs and peaks so constantly, rather than obviously our insulin being able to be stable and regulate itself, for example. So there's been some benefits around, you know, our blood sugar is up and down all of the time because we're constantly, feeding rather than just 3 meals a day, for example.
Okay. So that's the potential. Just butting in, sorry. No. If we see dogs with diabetes, is there mileage to say that because we're feeding them snacks throughout the day, bit of a biscuit here, a bit of a whatever there, then their dinner, then a bit of this, and have a bit of that.
Surely it's got to be the same.
Got to be a link there, surely.
Yeah, so we're obviously expecting when we eat something as humans, there's always a response in terms of blood sugar levels to what we're eating. So you would expect it to be the same. I'm not sure. I presume there's probably been studies done on that. I'm not sure. Yeah. But in terms of fasting, there's also this idea that there's been some studies that have found, so it lowers blood pressure, also lowers our total LDL, so bad cholesterol. Yeah. So improves cardiovascular risk factors as we age. Again, we're coming back full circle to reduces inflammatory markers, so helps with conditions such as arthritis, for example, as we age. So we're starting to see...
Amount of overweight dogs, what was it, 60% of them have arthritis? Yeah. I mean, same thing, too much food going in, inflammatory markers, it's all linked.
Joints under severe strain. But I think what the main reason for this, and it would be interesting to see whether we could see the same in dogs, is the reason why it's so beneficial, what they're saying for brain health, and this has been researched quite a lot now, is this idea that it's around fasting enables cellular repair. Yes, I think so. When we eat kind of sugary foods, essentially it can affect our cells. It's been linked to cancer. It's been linked to kind of cognitive function, Alzheimer's, for example. So what we're saying is during periods of fasting, cells essentially go through something called kind of autophagy. So it's almost like a clean-up mode, which when we sleep overnight, that essentially replicates that, depending on how long you sleep. You've not been sleeping so much lately, so your cells are doomed. No, but in the grand scheme of things, obviously, the idea around breakfast is, breaking fast. Yes. So essentially we fast, so we enable a certain level of cellular repair as we sleep, which we're in that rested state.
Is it when you get to something like 14 hours or something? Are there sort of some barriers there?
So there are. So the real benefits, I now think what we're starting to see is around like this 24-hour mark, which is quite a long time to have gone without. So obviously you can still drink water, but it's no kind of food. And essentially that kind of autophagy process kind of cleans up cells. So what it says is if you've got cells in your body that are starting to kind of mutate, like cancers or cells linked to kind of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all those sorts of things, at kind of 24 hours, we're going through a cellular repair process.
So then feeding 6 days and not 7 is the big thing for dogs, if it's anything like.
If it mimics exactly the same scientific kind of process, cellular molecular processes, we would expect there to be benefits. I think given, and this is just hearing you speak, there's very different kind of digestive, there's different requirements for dogs, isn't there, in terms of calorie intake?
The calorie intake is different, but also they're pure carnivore, though they can have other things. The short digestive tract, the types of teeth they have, they're carnivores. They handle pathogens a lot better than we would. Saying part of that is that short digestive tract. So, and again, they can handle bone, they can destroy bone in their digestive juices. So there's got to be some differences there. Yeah. But on saying that, and I've said before, their gut biome is closer to ours than it is to the wolf that they came from. Yeah. So if that's the case, then there's got to be something there that they are developing through the symbiotic relationship we have with them.
Yeah. And I think some of the reasons why we are doing it is because of the conditions that we are finding are becoming more prevalent as we age. Whereas I sometimes think if one key benefit of fasting is the prevention of cognitive decline and obviously the presence of Alzheimer's, dementia, essentially, do we need to protect for that for the same way in dogs? So it's this idea around, I suppose, cognitive decline in dogs. Does it have the same effect on quality of life?
There is something called canine CCD, canine cognitive decline, which is a form of Alzheimer's, dementia in dogs, and it's there. Again, we don't know how their brain functions. They don't obviously communicate how we communicate, so but they're using all the same parts of their brain. You know, we've now been able to get dogs to sit in MRI scanners. Yeah. And actually saw the program where they did it. It was brilliant. But they've now been able to do, maps of how the brain functions, and they have done everything from playing photographs of inanimate objects and then their owner, and they can see how the dog's brain functions when they see their owner. And sometimes it's love, sometimes it's not. It's the same way the human brain functions. Yeah. They've done other things where, the big thing I talked about before, the dog that did something because they were fearful, because it was escape and avoidance learning, or there was an aversive involved, they would, the dog's only doing it because they're frightened of you. No, it's not. Their brains function in exactly the same way as a brain that's getting a reward. They see the reward in actually avoiding the aversive because they've been trained properly. They understand the structure, and it's almost like a little win for them. And we see those so many times again, that their brains function in the same way as humans. The same parts are being triggered by very similar emotions, or we think they're similar emotions. It looks like it is from what we're seeing. So why would we not think that they have the same potential problems as us?
Yeah, and I think sometimes the reason why we look on kind of cognitive kind of aging, so we put such an importance on it with humans, is because obviously there's this idea that it's linked to reduction in independence. So I suppose when we see an older adult who has early onset dementia or Alzheimer's disease, we start to kind of have negative associations to that. So, maybe somebody can't kind of remember where they are, they can't remember how to care for themselves, they don't remember family members. So it starts to really impact their life. And I think some of the data that I was looking at in dogs was this idea around, we're always caring for them from kind of day one to the very end of their lives. So it wouldn't necessarily have the same detrimental impact on quality of life, you would hope, although some would argue. But there is this idea around, obviously, the idea that obviously dementia and Alzheimer's is at kind of cellular level and brain function, and ultimately people with that condition, do come to overall mortality. So there's the kind of aspect about the prevention of it to obviously increase longevity, but around obviously ideas that it affects independence and quality of life might be different in dogs to what we see in humans. So it's interesting there definitely needs more research for sure, and that's what the study was saying. But essentially what it was saying is, you need to kind of weigh up the pros and cons. What are the actual main benefits of fasting dogs like we do as humans? Has it got kind of more benefits for weight management, in which we can address that in different ways and not overfeed our kind of dogs from the start and things like that. Whereas what we're focusing on in humans is obviously the prevention of age-related decline, which maybe affects more independence, caring for yourself, disability-free life years, etc. So There might be benefits at a cellular level for dogs, in which case it would then be beneficial, but actually in terms of lifestyle kind of modification, it might actually not be needed, and they might.
I think the difficulty we have is that when you say about independence and those things, and it affects their, the loneliness and things like that, we can see it in humans because we can communicate with them.
Yes.
We don't know whether dogs are feeling lonely because they're the only dog in the household and they go out for a walk, once a week, and the rest of the time they're just let out into the back garden. Yeah. You know what I mean? Have a mooch around their mate. We don't know that because we can't communicate. We anthropomorphisize way, way, way too much. Yeah. But we really don't know. At the end of the day, we don't know what that dog is thinking, what that dog is feeling. And that is, well, we've got some way with the MRI, but we still don't know on a day-to-day basis as to what impact their living with us has.
Yeah. I think we've got a long way to go with all of this research, and I think the beauty of it is that I think, just from discussing on this episode of the podcast, we can see how exactly it aligns. But actually now what we're going to have to do is do the studies where we take what we know, I think, in humans and have a look about the potential benefits in dogs and vice versa from what the dog kind of aging studies are looking at.
Well, I think there's so many things that you could take across there, and obviously there's so many dogs that you can get a really good data spread because you've got all these different types of environments. And I suppose you've got to structure your questionnaires in such a way that the owner is actually having to input a lot of information, and there are questions to test the responses to make sure that you are getting true information. People don't want to think they're putting in information. I mean, I suppose even just I was going to say the easiest way to look at it is all these being anonymous, because I say to a lot of people, don't tell me what you think I want to hear about what you're doing with your dog. Yeah. Tell me what you're actually doing. And anybody who comes to me for a training assessment, I want videos, because don't tell me that you're doing it, show me what's going on. Because sometimes they want to tell you that they're doing something when actually they're not, because they don't want to think they're a bad dog owner, which doesn't help fix the problem.
Yeah, and I think I've done the same too. I've said, I'm experiencing this with Marlowe, whatever it'll be. And you always say, send a video, because what you think you're seeing might not actually be the behaviour that you're seeing, for example. And I think this is where human psychology is so fascinating, because we have this idea, especially as we age, about a sense of identity. We don't want to lose that sense of identity. Maybe our mind feels like us, which is that. Does that remain the same throughout our lifespan? There's characteristics and traits about our personality that are exceptionally stable, which we wouldn't expect to see change as a direct result of aging. But what we have to do is have a kind of a realistic appraisal of what physically our bodies are capable of doing. But we also have this thing about, in terms of psychology, of social desirability. So everybody has varying degrees of how socially desirable they want to be, some significantly less than others. But what that really impacts is how we tell the truth and the things that we disclose, because we don't want to be portrayed in a negative light to others. And I think that is one of the main take-home messages of this, of we can input data about our dogs, but we've got to remember that in terms of being socially desirable, it's coming through a lens that we want people to see us in a good light.
And that's irrelevant. It's about trying to help your dog. Yeah.
So some of the data in these studies I interpret with extreme caution, because in terms of having 50,000 responses, that will reduce bias somewhat, because the more numbers we have, the more powered a study is. So it kind of helps to address that rather than a smaller sample. But actually all of this information is only coming from what owners of dogs disclose, because we can't ask dogs ourselves. Yeah. So it's coming from the lens of what we see. And obviously you say this all the time, it's what we think. We can put human emotion onto a dog. We can put our thoughts on the environment and what happened in that scenario, etc. So it's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of the data around dogs, and there's almost no other way of doing it, we're fortunate that maybe we could take bloods to see insulin responses to things, and we're now starting to get this MRI data, which is more factual, which we can't interpret in any other way, which we call kind of quantitative data. We can see that, and that's kind of statistically sound, if you like. But there's always going to be open to interpretation about all of the kind of overall benefit, overall data that we see.
Well, talking about sleep before, and you were saying that obviously that sleep time is to actually regenerate. Then the other situation is that you look at dogs, for example, with their sleep. If they don't get solid sections of sleep where they are not almost sleeping with one eye open, then that is a massive, massive stress for the dog. Yeah. So therefore, all those same problems arise. How does somebody who just lives with their pet dog, how do they know when their dog is sleeping whether they are actually in REM sleep, getting the best possibility from it, or they're just surface sleeping because they're just waiting for that noise that they're going to be up and alert and what's going on. So therefore, they're not actually getting that deep sleep. Which is, again, causing inflammation and stress and anxiety and all those types of things. So the interpretation is very, very difficult. Yeah. But that's always going to be the case with... I mean, it must be... I mean, I heard somebody say that the reason why it takes longer to train a vet than a human doctor is because the vet can't speak to his patient and they've got to be able to interpret those signs.
And it's so true, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the most difficult things you can do. You can look at a dog and you can think they're happy, and then all of a sudden you just spot something. And I was talking to a guy the other day who's a trainer, and he was saying quite often he gets a lot of people where they're talking to him about problems in the household, and they'll call him and say, dog A is a real pain in the neck, and it's causing problems in the house, and it's doing this. And he goes over and does a lot of in-house work with them. And he said, I think he was saying 9 out of 10 times, it's something like 8 or I can't remember now, 8 or 9 out of 10 times, he said, the dog that the owner calls me about and says, this is the one that's causing all the problems. He goes, it's not. Yeah. That's the one. And I had it the other day, I had 2 dogs here, and the belief that the owner had that this dog was a problem is actually, the dog's not a problem, that dog's a problem. But that dog's feeding off that problem. Yeah.
We see it through a completely different lens, don't we?
One dog had actually got very bad eyesight and was therefore staring a lot because he couldn't see properly. Okay. And this other dog was getting freaked out by it.
I was going to say, I suppose that's quite an unusual behaviour, dog to dog. Just
staring is a bad behaviour for dog to dog. Yeah. So this dog's staring at him, freaking this other dog out. This other dog is getting aggressive and reactive, and they're thinking this dog's got the problem. It's because this dog's a fearful dog. The other dog, because it's got bad eyesight, is freaking the fearful dog out. So the whole dynamic was different. And, for the owners hadn't seen it, which is understandable. It's not something you can just go, whoa, yeah, I understand that. Yeah. So across the board, it's pay more attention. But there are so many links between human health and dog health.
I actually think you could do this episode, and then you could take all of those individual points, so the inflammation, the diet, the exercise, even moving on to more kind of things that we'll maybe expect to see down the road, and you could actually do individual kind of episodes on those, because you could unpick the science.
Take the sleep. How do you actually make sure your dog... And it's training in a lot of cases, not training the dog to sleep, but it's little things like people, when they're teaching their dog to go in the crate, they make it exciting. There's a lot you can see online training courses there, and they make it exciting. Whoa, well done, way! And the dog then has a state of mind of going into the crate that they are constantly excited and het up, or B, because the way they've been trained, they're expecting a reward, so they're going in there, and the person's waiting, the dog's waiting on the person, the dog's waiting for its next, what do I do next, what do I do next? Yeah. So the dog's lying down in its crate or its bed or whatever, but it's there waiting for the next command. A lot of these people that put their dogs on bed stays and the dog goes on the bed, it's done through a training, place is one thing, but putting them on a bed stay for the dog to be calm. The dog's not calm. It's on that bedstay waiting for somebody to break that command by marking it. The dog comes on, what do we do next? How do we get the next treat? So they're in a constant state of stress because when's it coming? Waiting for the next command, what's going to happen next? When is it going to come? What's going on here? And maybe some dogs will actually settle and will actually then, fall asleep. But there is a huge difference between getting a dog to calm. Relaxation protocols, it's garbage. You're not teaching your dog to relax. These dogs doing something to relax. It needs to be able to understand what relaxation is. I saw a very simple technique. This guy's throwing a ball for his dog, constantly throwing a ball for his dog, to the point that the dog's worn out. Yeah. And he goes on his bed and it just wants to crash out. And it learns that my bed is where I crash out. I can just sleep. Yeah. And those types of things, basic physical exercise there can help a dog in different areas. So yeah, we could do a whole podcast on just sleep or on, I don't know about dental health, but a lot of those, healthy eating and social interaction, how to make your dog's day enriched.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just...
And I think if there is anything that we've discussed today that anybody listening thinks, I'd actually like to know more kind of granular detail about that said thing. Yeah, it would be really...
Yeah, we're quite happy to talk about anything. Dogs are dogs. I'll talk about dogs till, hell freezes over, as they say. Yeah. I have no better subject to talk about. But yeah, it's quite interesting seeing the actual similarity between healthy aging for humans and healthy aging for dogs.
Yeah, and we're starting to kind of move in like this parallel space, which I think is exciting.
Oh, that's Bounce. Little tiny dog.
I thought, good job I saw Lisa. I was like, what's she doing out there?
Yeah, she's out with Bounce.
Oh my gosh.
You'll see Bounce in a minute.
Can I go to the... Do we want to say something before we finish up, and then I'll...
I want to go and see the puppy.
Yeah, sorry guys, thanks for listening. I have just spotted a puppy outside. I'm like...
Yeah, she'll bring him in. She'll bring him in for you. Bring her in, should I say. She'll bring her in.
I remember when Marla was that tiny.
Yeah.
She might think we're still going... Oh,